would like to welcome in order to advance our discussion regarding the future of teacher education in Wisconsin, I'd like to invite the Provost, Aaron Brower, Johannes Britz, Greg Summers, and Jackie Weissenburger to deliver a presentation on teacher education program array within the UW system. Would you please join us at the table? I don't have to do this, do I? No. I know.
Good morning, Regents.
Good morning.
Over the past months and perhaps years, the Provost has spent a great deal of time addressing the issues and opportunities involved in our current program array across all UW campuses. This discussion and review has led to some recommendations or proposals to ensure that our future program array effectively meets the needs of Wisconsin and our region. As we began this preliminary review, we decided to initially focus on our teacher education program array, as all four-year campuses contribute to our teacher workforce, and changing licensure requirements and demands call for a need for further review. Oops. After we began our review, we discovered, and many of us already knew this, that over the past 8 years...
You're going to have to pull your microphone a little closer.
Okay. After we began to examine the program array within teacher education, we recognized that over the past 8 years, our undergraduate enrollments in our teacher education programs have diminished significantly across the UW system. We also discovered through numerous reports that there is an increasing demand for teachers in specific regions of Wisconsin. Critically, more teachers are needed in our rural, and I'm going to add urban, districts, as well as northern school districts in the state. Certain fields, such as science, technology, math, and special education, are in undersupply. For example, in the case of special education, in the 2016-17 year, DPI reported that over 650 special education teachers were working under an emergency license. Also, changing licensure requirements, technology advancements, innovations are reshaping how students are learning. The charter school movement is changing how and where students enroll. So all of these have brought about a further demand and a critical need to address the teacher education program array for the 21st century.
Thanks, Jackie. And I, from Milwaukee, we then do a kind of a focus on our campus as one of the examples. And we also stated there clearly that we would like system to take a lead, overall the system to look at schools of education. And for us, I just make a note to say a strong and a vibrant school of education is for us critical. It's just our access mission, it's our urban location, and our community engagement, and our research university. But if you look at, as Jackie alluded to, what happened in schools of education actually across the nation, if you just look at our own enrollments, we went down by about 1,000 students since 2010, which is about a third, from 2,880 students to now 1,900 students. Actually, we see a steeper decline in undergraduate students than graduates. And actually, we saw an increase in doctoral students from 15 graduated doctoral students in 2010 to 20 doctoral students now, which means that the School of Education made a major contribution to the achievement of our R1 status on our campus. And then the question then comes up, how did we respond on our campus? Now, Now, if you have that steep decline in enrollment numbers and you're tuition driven in terms of your budget, you must have to make some changes. And actually, we did reduce the number of faculty through retention and people who retire or took other jobs from 69 faculty members to 45 since 2013, and also academic staff. The teaching load, the faculty, tenured faculty in School of Education increased their teaching load. We also look at administrative efficiencies by combining some of the departments. And then we also realign our curriculum. And we also charge the school to look at program planning. But that's where we thought we should do a bigger discussion within the system. But we also said we cannot just focus on a smaller School of Education and just look at measures to align the budget. We have to be positive. And that's when we started also under the leadership of our Chancellor, the Grow Your Own initiative, where we work with the MCube, with MPS, MITC, and UWM to really recruit students in MPS already to become teachers through dual enrollment from junior standing, senior, MITC, come to UWM, and hopefully will be employed in MPS. And we saw actually there's such a need specifically of teachers of color within the MPS system. Then we also look at retention. Actually, the school has a very good retention rate, but we said once you have them, we want to keep even more of the students to graduate successfully. And then we want to improve the yield. Students who apply, we don't want to lose one of them. We want all as far as we can. So the school actually reached out individually through faculty to ensure that we increase the yield rate. And actually tell people that one of the best professions you can go into is in education. And then every department from the dean got a charge to look at strategic enrollment action plan to really see how we can increase our enrollments. That's in a nutshell then just to look at UWM.
So one of the things we'd like to highlight for the committee is the broader implications of this initiative that extend beyond teacher education. And one of the goals we're kind of excited about is to explore the ways in which this initiative might help to pilot some strategies for managing the overall program array. Teacher education is not the only area within our system where capacity is not necessarily aligned with student demand or job market demand. And particularly where there is overcapacity, some of the strategies that we have as a system or as individual campuses are somewhat limited. The most draconian of those strategies, perhaps, is closing a campus to deal with capacity issues. But that has all kinds of very difficult implications and would be devastating to the communities involved. We have in the past in the UW system set enrollment caps for campuses. We could perhaps consider those in the future, but those carry with them all kinds of unintended consequences and inefficiencies that are difficult to predict and manage. But managing the program array in some sort of centralized and coordinated way, nuanced way, we do think has some hope for a strategy in hoping to manage some of these capacity issues. It can allow us to preserve opportunities for students across the state while at the same time helping the system to use its resources efficiently. But we know from experience that that kind of management has to be quite nuanced, it has to be data-driven, and there has to be a very strong leadership role from the board and from UW system. And so we're really hoping that this education initiative can help to pilot that as a test case to see how that kind of strategy might work in practice.
Thank you. And now to kind of follow up on Greg's comment about some more general strategies, one of the strategies that is already in play to address program array is our collaborative degrees. We have right now throughout the UW and now involving every one of the campuses, 10 collaborative degree programs and 2 more in the pipeline. These collaborative degree programs are pretty standard master's and bachelor's level degrees online. The way they work is that the partner institutions split up the curriculum. Faculty come from those partner institutions. Extension and now the unit that runs this through Extension will do this through UW system. Manages the collaboration. And it provides programs that are directed specifically at adult and non-traditional students, which, as we know, is the largest segment of the degree-seeking population right now. The programs are growing like gangbusters. So this is the last several years of growth. The line on the top is enrollment growth. We have about 7,500 students across these 10 programs right now. We're projecting over 8,000 in the next year. That'll represent, if that was an institution, these programs, that would represent the 5th or 4th largest institution in the UW system. And these programs are all run to be revenue positive. So the gray bar is the total revenue for these programs, and the red piece of it is GPR that's contributing to that revenue, and then the blue and the yellow are the important ones. Those are program revenue from these programs. The blue bar represents the revenue that is distributed out to the campuses that backfill the expenses on the campuses for their efforts into the program, and the yellow bar is revenue in expense of expenses that gets distributed to those campuses for general purpose. We are more than $3 million more than $2 million in net positive this year, and projecting to be $3 million, almost $3 million next year.
So these are some of our recommendations going forward. Starting with schools of education, departments of education, we would like to examine this area more completely and use it as a model case. So what we need to do is we need to respond to changing licensure and accreditation requirements. We need to reduce academic program duplication in low-demand areas. We need to increase academic program offerings in high-demand areas that was referred to earlier, STEM fields, special education, etc. And we also need to reach different audiences through alternative delivery modes, such as the collaborative program that was described earlier, but also many potential teachers out there would like to be teachers, but they cannot afford to leave their place-bound employment to come to campuses to get a teacher education licensure. So we can cohorts, online courses, and off-campus courses at critical high-demand PK-12 locations we're proposing initially. But ultimately, we would like to have be charged with convening a task force in which we would develop a vision and set goals for the UW system program array in teacher education. We believe we cannot just do this alone as provosts. We need UW system colleges and schools of education representatives. We need representatives from the Department of Public Instruction. We need PK-12 school district leaders who are ultimately involved with having difficulty hiring and retaining teachers in high-demand areas. We need CISA leaders who also support our PK-12 educational environment across the state. And we need community leaders involved in this task force so that we can be more strategic, we can develop a roadmap for the future. At this point, I'd like to conclude and say to all of you, or ask you if you have any questions.
Well, before I open it to the committee to ask questions, I want to thank you very much. This is precisely the kind of thing that I had hoped, that we had hoped, that you would do for us today. As you know, we started this inquiry almost a year ago, and we are quite serious about what needs to be done. We have a market need for teachers. We have a changing environment for both students and for our customers, our students. and we have a changing environment in how children and young adults learn. And we want to examine all those so we have an opportunity to examine our schools and departments of colleges and departments of education, and see what's really working, what needs modification, what might need changing. So I very much appreciate this. As you know, the plan is to have a panel, much as yourself, consisting of heads of colleges and department heads of education, to talk about some of the innovation that's being done at our August meeting. That's our last panel. And at that August meeting, I am looking forward to making a couple of announcements. It's premature, things are still being worked on, but making a couple of announcements of what we're going to be doing going forward in this next year. But I want to thank you very much. I have a list of questions, but I've said enough. We have Regent Evers here, who has an interest in this, and I imagine that the accreditation issue you might want to talk about a little bit. And we have Regent Tyler, who has a very keen interest in this. So I want to open it up to the committee to ask questions, and then I'll save mine, and if there's still more, I'll add them at the end. Tony?
Yeah, thanks.
Regent Evers?
That's fine, thank you. And thanks for your good work. And of course, this is a complex topic. We have needs. We have a shrinking number of people that want to go into the profession, which seems to be a major issue. But we also have a need to do better and how we approach it. So just two things. I just want to make sure that the description of PK through 12 school district leaders includes classroom teachers, and I know it does, but I just want to re-emphasize that having those folks at the table is important. The other thing that I want the group to keep in mind, and this may seem like a small issue because it's a small N, but when in many cases, and there's a fair amount of research to discuss, to bear this out, is that people generally, when they go into the teaching profession, stick around and try to become employed within a relatively small area where they receive their education training. And that probably won't change much, and that's always been the case, and my guess is it will continue to be the case. So that will kind of be a balancing act for you all, because if indeed that remains to be true, we may need to look at how acceptable or accepting we are of low enrollment programming. If you have one or two physics teachers or potential physics teachers out of UW Superior, and there's 15 physics openings, the likelihood of finding a physics teacher that's graduating from UW-Milwaukee to go into that part of the state are slim to none. So I think there's going to have to be some accommodations around there so that we continue to have highly qualified people. And the other thing I think is around highly qualified, not to belittle different efforts, but we have to make sure that whatever we do, we aren't dumbing down the profession in order to make sure that we have adequate numbers of teachers. I think we can do that, and I think we are all prepared to do that. A lot of it is around how we communicate about the importance of the profession, and I encourage this task force to also take a look at that too.
Regent Tyler?
Thank you. Wow, where does a person start on this subject? Well, I'll start by adding my thanks and appreciation for looking at and studying this area, because when I talk with employers and we talk about, we're 300,000 people short of bodies to fill slots, assuming they're all successful by 2025 or 27. I mean, that puts this into an even more difficult context, I think. because there's a lot of competition for opportunities like there have never been in the past. So, but what's so critically important about this is if we don't get this right, then the rest doesn't work very well. And so I really appreciate your work. A couple of things that I'd like to just put on the table, and I won't get deep into them because we don't have enough time, but you know, I'd almost like to see pre-K described as maybe PBK or like pre-birth to K, because so much learning happens so early in early childhood is suffering some of the same issues that K-12 is suffering, and that is, you know, low compensation. I think that's something that, you know, maybe it's out of our wheelhouse to deal with that, but it's an issue that will continue to dog us if it doesn't get solved. I mean, even we've experienced career and tech ed teachers that have had 7-8 years in their school district or making it their way through the salary progression, and then they opt out to go into private industry for a raise that's going to put them over the top of what they'll ever be able to earn in the education system. So, I mean, there's some serious challenges there, and I don't know if those should be, you know, part of that discussion, should be brought into this discussion or not. But compensation is certainly a big issue. I think one of the people that I would add to your list of people at the table, and I certainly understand classroom teachers, but employers have a strong understanding for the pain that they're feeling today, and they recognize that the pain is the intensity is going to accelerate for a long time before it moderates. Probably doesn't get better in our lifetime, but I think they're a strong voice, and I think you're going to need strong voices to advocate for the changes. I think at some point in time you're going to need a discussion around resources, and I would argue that they can be strong advocates for getting those resources if you get them into that discussion early. They certainly will understand. So I would encourage engagement with those folks early on. So I better end it there. It could go on for a long time. Thank you.
Regent Platt.
Just one, I guess, general comment is I think regardless of what industry you're in, we're all going to face workforce development issues moving forward. And so, you know, continuing to look at how to improve the status quo is great, but I'll challenge you guys to think outside the box. I think all of us, regardless of the industry, are going to have to start thinking about different ways of solving workforce development challenges, and it certainly applies to the education profession as well. So I guess don't just try to fix what's there, you know, get creative and get innovative.
Regent Ray, I'm putting you on the spot. He's involved in school right now, so.
Yeah, no, I think this is a very important issue, and again, I appreciate you all and your work and what you've done here. I guess I won't repeat what most of the regents on the committee have already said, but I would say that, you know, challenging students through this process as well. I know you mentioned the duplication and, you know, that list. I think that's a good start for students. I know I've talked extensively with the Dean of the College of Education up at Eau Claire about issues surrounding licensure, as well as, you know, how do we get students in this profession. So I, again, just want to thank you all for your work and dedication to this issue.
Thank you. I've got a couple direct questions. Provost Britz, you talked about in your slide where you had retention. As I've been examining this, the retention is retention within the School of Education to completion, but it's also retention within the profession, because that's a critical, and Regent Evers, you can speak to that. That's a critical need. If you can get a teacher to stay for 3 to 4 years, now, what are some of the things that you're looking at because I imagine you are, in the elements to retain once you're in the profession? And it'll get me to another question to you, Provost Brower. So be ready. Yeah.
So, Regent Middle, as the provost and not as an educator, I have the dean of education here, and I do have the authority to delegate the question in my campus. So I wonder if you mind if I ask Ellen Shoho.
Well, considering we flew through the approvals, we got a little time.
Yeah, and I think, I saw the numbers in MPS, how many teachers actually leave, and what can we do to retain them, but I thought he might actually add more value to a very important question.
All right, thank you. And please introduce the dean.
This is Dean Alan Shoho, who is the dean of the School of Education on our campus.
Thank you, Dean Shoho.
Thank you, Regent. The retention is a critical piece. As you mentioned, nationally, usually by year 5, about 50% of teachers are gone. So that's a big concern nationally. I think in our school, we're doing I have my assistant dean here. We're actually implementing a number of new strategies this summer to help increase our retention, along with my associate dean, and we're engaging all our faculty about this process.
And that is retention within the profession?
Within the school.
Within the school?
Within the profession, it's a little more difficult for us because we don't have as much control.
I realize that.
So, for example, we've got the data for MPS. MPS has about a 90% retention rate currently. We just got that data yesterday from them. And so...
That's a 5-year retention rate?
I believe that's a year-to-year retention rate. That's not a 5-year.
Yeah. All right. Then, would you please stay at the table then? And I'm going to turn to Provost Brower. On the collaborative degrees, the collaborative degrees, the flex and online degrees that are doing a job of our non-traditional, with our non-traditional students, what is the plan to have them experience classrooms in addition to their academic studies?
So 2 parts to that question, and it's the right question to ask, absolutely. So the collaborative degree programs are primarily online, entirely online, and so they work in some contexts and not others. In other words, for example, as you know, the flex RN to BSN program as a degree completion program takes in registered nurses who have already had their clinicals, and then it adds to that professional studies that allow them to continue their studies and get their bachelor's level degree. In a similar way with, my mic seems to have been cut out, but I'm going to keep going here.
Yeah, that's why I have mine close.
In a similar way with education, one of the things that's actually stopped us is because the importance of doing classroom work and supervised classroom work in particular doesn't lend itself always to an online format. That's not necessarily the case. There are ways to address that, but that's what we'd have to confront for these, to do this in an online format.
I understand that. I asked the question not to necessarily get an answer, but that you're aware that that's something that really needs, because that has to do with retention, and it also has to do with the quality of the teaching once they're produced.
That's right.
All right, and yes.
Could I address one
Yes.
thing related to retention in the workforce?
Uh-huh.
The literature shows that if teachers feel supported in the early years through mentorship programs, perhaps through additional support from UW campuses or other campuses, through the first 3 years of their employment, they're much more likely to remain. So one of the ways in which UW campuses could help our districts is we could offer programming for those first, second, and third year teacher in a cohort format. Teachers initially, the first, second year, often face classroom management challenges as one example. So UW campuses, as part of this examination, could look to ways that we could provide on a more systematic approach support to our school districts for those beginning teachers.
Thank you. Yes. Provost Summers, would you like to weigh in on this?
No, I think everybody has covered this well. I think what we're learning at Stevens Point, the more we dig in, for example, to the college's restructuring, we're doing a lot more digging down the educational pipeline than we have had to in the past. The more engagement you can have with K through 12 institutions, the earlier the better. And we're seeing that in all kinds of contexts. And I think teacher education is one example, but pipelines for all kinds of high demand fields across the state, we're seeing that they really begin in those early years, and that higher education has an increasing responsibility to dig into that and to partner with those schools to help. I mean, because it's a collective problem we have to collaborate on.
So in other words, more collaboration between our School of Education and with the K through 12, so that there's engagement for the students at an earlier stage than my experience, which was when my last semester. One more question for you. And we talked about the alignment of instruction with market needs. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more about, and I believe Regent Tyler brought that up when he talked about employer support, because at our friends at the technical colleges, the technical schools, they work closely with employers to find out what specific needs. Now, it's true campus-wide, but let's just talk about education. Do you have any comments about what your institutions are planning to do with that kind of alignment for market needs? I believe Provost Britz, you talked about that a bit. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I can elaborate and give you a couple examples. One of my also jobs as dean is that I'm also serve on the Bradley Tech High School Commission, which is a special high school that serves CTEs, career and technology, and that's a great example. I think you probably have all heard, there's a lot of demand for CTE teachers. The problem is there's hardly any programs. I think there's only one, Stout. I think UW Stout produces CTE teachers, and I believe they only produce...
Translate. What's CTE?
Career and technology education.
Thank you.
And they only produce about 5 to 10 a year. The demand is significantly more than that. But the problem is that we looked into developing a program for that, but there's no student interest. And my provost, I mean, one of the concerns, as he's already elated, is, I'm very enrollment challenged. And if I'm going to develop a program, I have to have students come to that program. Otherwise, it's basically a resource drain on us. So it's a very touchy thing about finding, we have this large demand, but at the same time, we oftentimes don't have the interest there. Math, science, computer science is another one. Right now is a hot field. We're trying to get more computer science teachers. Yet, if you think about it, if you're a computer science major, are you going to go into teaching? Most computer science majors want to go work for Google, Amazon, Apple.
Epic.
Whatever you name it. Very few of them are going to actually want to go to become a computer science teacher in a high school. So it's very challenging for us in trying to, that's why we've got to do some more work about changing the narrative of becoming a teacher. Now we're hearing from families of teachers. Some of you may know some people who come from family of teachers. I mean, their mother was teacher, their grandmother was teacher. Well, what we're hearing nowadays is that oftentimes they're actually discouraging the next generation to becoming teachers, which is a very big concern for us. And so, we have a challenge, an image challenge. We have, I think one of the regents mentioned about compensation. I think that's a big concern. You're seeing it in all of you reading about Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, what's happening. And in particular, he mentioned early childhood. Do you know that most early childhood educators make around $30,000 starting out? Tell me if you can live on $30,000 with the family for our most important kids at that young age. It's a real, so I don't think it's not a simple answer, but I think the issue is we've got to tackle many of these issues working with a lot of other people.
So there's a market demand, but you also have to have a market demand for students who are interested. Provost Brower, I keep calling Regents. Provost Brower.
Yeah, thank you. I actually want to underscore one point about the market demand and particularly the analysis of market demand. And this relates more broadly than just the teacher education component here, but this is a request to the Regents for support. One of the things that stymied us as institutions in the program array area is not having a coordinated market demand analysis. And what you get instead is different market demand analyses through the notice of intent process, but there are other ways that it works as well, which ends up looking self-interested. And to the extent that we can encourage a more coordinated, single source of truth, let's call it, market analysis process, we can then proceed strategically across the whole system to develop those programs that are most in need, that where we can put the resources in that need to be there, and again, it sort of helps us in the systemness as well as helps institutions individually.
Coordinate the market demand for students going into the program.
Yes.
Yes,
I mean,
that's
it starts
a
with
component.
That's right.
That's a component. Thank you very much. And actually, that's what we're taking steps to do now. But any other questions, comments? Yeah, Regent Tyler.
I had one, but go ahead.
Sure. And then.
So I kind of passed by the demand question, but because I thought I was getting too long-winded, but I want to weigh in on it. I absolutely agree with your comment about a statewide demand understanding of what's required. But when we talk about demand, and this is why I'd like to see employers at the table in the discussion, I think demand has to be viewed from a variety of different perspectives. I mean, we clearly have needs or demand in the industry that students aren't interested in going into. We have demand from students that we're educating, and then they graduate and they have a poor outcome because there's no demand for the area that they were educated in. And so I would encourage that we look at this from a variety of different lenses, and certainly, if we relate this back to outcomes, and I guess I would think of it, outcomes as a successful career start and a livable wage. Your comment about $30,000 in early childhood educators, I would argue you have a bias toward Milwaukee or southeast Wisconsin because they're nowhere near that up in our neighborhood. They're more like 20. But I would encourage viewing demand from the view of employers and what's needed. And even if you have a long list of people, one of the first votes I took when I joined the technical college system was to kill a program that had a 2-year waiting list. We had an outcry of students, but the reason we killed it is because nobody got jobs. I mean, the outcomes were really poor. It was a fun program. My wife raises ponies. It was all about animal husbandry and equine issues, but it's about outcomes. So I would encourage you to look at that as well.
Thank you.
Just to circle back to the retention piece. One thing that seems to be supported by research is people stay in the profession as teachers if they have voice and feel they have autonomy. And I believe that in my heart that that's part of the issue too. And as we think through those two things, voice and autonomy for classroom teachers, I think that leads us to think through how administrators are prepared to encourage that, because I'm not sure that's a natural outcome of being an administrator. And the other thing that there seems to be good research on. It's the expansion, whether the residencies or other opportunities for classroom interactions, being in the classroom as soon as you can during teacher preparation tends to lead to better retention also.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Regent Jones.
Yes, I'd like to close out this session by thanking you again, congratulating you again on the progress you've made. I get the distinct impression that this is a work in progress and you're not done. And so I want to encourage you to keep after it. I know how difficult it must be, and I look forward to hearing from you again as to the progress we're making on this important initiative. Thank you very much.
Finally, I got some data. It appears that we approved 495 faculty members receiving tenure or promoted today. So we have the number. Yes, Chancellor.